Hello, welcome to Wayland's Wisdom. Over the course of my life, I've seen the political parties in the UK becoming more and more extreme, primarily in their social beliefs rather than their economic beliefs, because the economy is something which most people can agree on as to how it should and shouldn't work. The reason primarily being that those in the political class tend to be able to benefit from the current economic system. Now, the social side of politics is possibly the most important one, generally speaking, because economics can change and it can be tweaked to be more or less efficient, and you can still live quite peacefully, even in poverty. This may be a strange or alien idea to many people when they look around the world at the poorest parts and they see crime uh, of the worst kind being in some of the most impoverished areas. However, you could take two impoverished places and see the difference between the cultures. You can see how a place has become impoverished due to the culture, or whether or not a place has become crime ridden because of its poverty. There are impoverished places which are not crime ridden, but instead quite peaceful, yet still hard living due to their poverty. The idea of poverty causing crime is not hotly debated, but it is debated, and it's fairly obvious when you look over the world um, that poverty does not always cause crime. Sometimes it can, but there needs to be an underlying corruption of spirit before crime occurs. Anyway, the extreme nature of politics today is quite an interesting one, and I wish to propose a theory, and that I will call that the bouncing ball theory. Now, if you take a ball, a bouncy ball, and bounce it between the floor and the ceiling quite hard, it will at some point likely speed up before it slows down. Now, if you remove the slowing down process and have some kind of force within the ceiling and the wall, the ceiling and the floor, which encourages the ball to bounce faster, this will be the base analogy for the bouncing ball theory. Now, what I mean by this is if you imagine the floor as the people or the voters and the party as the ceiling, you have people who are going to vote for the party on the floor and the party who relies on the voters on the ceiling. Now, they already have these voters, and so they can propose more and more extreme policies, but they won't go too extreme so as not to frighten off the moderates. Now, the people on the floor, the voters, they will have be emboldened by the party and propose more and more extreme policies. They'll also have other. They'll have outside subvertants coming in, and proposing more and more extreme philosophies. And because these extreme philosophies are in line with the current much more moderate philosophies, they aren't seen as uh, as extreme as someone to the party's opposite. And so the party hears these policies and echoes them, and the people say that's not enough. We want more change, and this will happen over time. So the bouncing ball gets faster and faster between the party and the people, and so you end up with a party which started off as, uh, say, for instance, the Labour Party, because this is, I found, the best example. So you have a party which started out as somewhat left left of centre economically. They or even centrist, where they had a bit of socialism, but not too much, and it was they'd still like to benefit from a capitalist society. But over time, over the course of about 100 years now, this bouncing ball has been going between them, and they've been becoming more and more socialist in terms of their wishes, not necessarily the policies that they actually introduce once in power, but in terms of their rhetoric, they become more extreme, and they've become more socialist, even having communist elements within the party. And this is quite a worrying thing. However, there are ways to combat it from the outside of the party, in showing or being loud about how extreme they really are, um, showing or using the rhetoric of, um, showing the party that they have been duped by these extreme elements, and showing the voters as well that these extreme elements have come in, and these are in fact extreme ideas, um, and not really in line with what the voters' wishes are. Now, we can also look to the right. Now, the right is an interesting one because I've been circling, or I've been navigating right wing politics for many years now, and I've seen a strange normalization of policy. And I don't mean normalization as making it normal or, um, making it, palatable to the common man, but merely that the policies proposed have been brought back to a normal ground, as in it's gone past populism and gone to, um, a certain type of, general way of viewing the world, which is seen across the planet. Um, what, to be more specific, the social policies expressed amongst right wing groups is more akin to what has been believed for millennia by people across the world. So it's not getting extreme necessarily, but in the context of a quite left wing liberal paradigm, it's, seemingly quite extreme. The rejection of equality in most of its forms, and the rejection of our democracy as we know it in the UK seems to be quite extreme to, people who have not yet been, uh, separated from the current paradigm. Now, I quite like democracy, to be fair, in for the reason that it makes it able for people to, for the common man to gain power. Because as we've seen over the past few years, the elite class have been ever more inducted into the cult of extreme leftism, with trust fund children once growing up, for some reason becoming communists. Now, they feel as though they would benefit from a communist system because, in a lot of ways, they have kind of benefited from one, being given, um, money without work. Um, this is the kind of dream that a lot of communists have, where you don't actually have to work for your money or your resources, but you are simply given them and you can work as a choice. Now, in reality, um, when people stop working, governments get quite annoyed because governments stop making money due to lack of resources. And so people are forced to work. Anyway, so yes, the way that politics has become quite getting quite extreme and polarized is due to this bouncing ball theory. Now, this also works between the oppositions. So between the left and the right, you have this other bouncing ball, which gets faster and faster, where each side is trying to outdo each other. Oh, I'm more right wing. Oh, I'm more left wing. And this seems to be between the party and the left wing parties and the unofficial right wing groups rather than political parties. And this has been good in terms of um, getting sensible, uh, reality based ideas into the right rather than relying on liberalism and people being um, what they would term as classical liberals or libertarians into a much more traditional way of being rather than conservative, which also has its roots in liberalism. And the reason why I say this is good is because liberalism has failed. We've seen it fail in this country and we've seen it fail across the world. Now, people will reject this idea that it's failed in this country because they will believe that we've been living in a liberal country for um, centuries now. But this just isn't the case. If you consider the reality of what liberalism is or hopes to be, this hasn't been the case for most of the modern period, a period in which a lot of pro-liberals will say has been a liberal period, with class systems being very strict, with some periods of our modern history being somewhat theocratic, and religions being almost like a secondary government to a lot of people. And I don't really see a problem in that, to be honest. Um, I can see some issues, yes, but I can't see an overall problem. Now, the past 100 years has been quite liberal. However, there are still holdovers of a non-liberal England, and the holdovers of this more traditional England seem to fare much better. The countryside seems to be a much more traditional place. Depending on where you are, of course. I live in close proximity to the countryside, and it's very traditional where I am. But in other areas that I've been to, it's been mostly in the West Country. It seems to be very Liberal Democrat in terms of their voting and their view of the world. But these aren't necessarily farmers or um, people who actually work in the countryside for the countryside. These are more so um, people who own properties and work in urban areas or suburban areas, and they seem to have this sort of facade of liberalism, which, when someone has a facade of liberalism, means that they're easier to convince of traditional thought. So the way in which the liberal uh, or the way in which we can de-extremize the country is by continuing this bouncing ball and eventually at some point stopping it, taking the bouncing ball and just hitting it at the um, the left wing wall until the left wing wall gets too extreme for anyone to ever vote for. Now, in this country, the left seems to be shooting themselves in the foot quite a bit, in that they are doing things which annoy the right, and they are also somehow doing things which annoy the left, which has been eye opening for me as someone who used to be left wing and used to be around left wingers a lot, where they will see what the party says and echo it back rather than criticizing it constantly. Now, this year, with the Labour Party being in charge, I've seen many left wing people start to criticise the Labour Party. They're not left wing enough. They're not doing all these communist policies that I thought they'd promised. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. They're not supporting the country that I want them to support. And this has been eye opening because it's quite a rare thing, and it seems to come from underlying issues that left wing people have in terms of lines that they will not cross or lines they will not allow the parties to cross. And this seems to be a very good opportunity for traditionalists, uh, in which we can say, look, yes, we are right wing, but we're not, we're not frothing at the mouth nationalists or anything like that. And so we can save these people from their brain rot, essentially. And the so the bouncing ball theory can work to our advantage, but it could also work to our disadvantage, and we need to be very careful of that. We need to be very careful not to get too extreme as to put off the moderates. But as I've seen, the moderates seem to themselves be becoming far more traditionalist. I've seen within my own family, for instance, members who are quite moderate, economically liberal, socially somewhat conservative, but they're of a conservative liberal mix, who would always vote Tory, and they would vote the way that they've always voted. I've now seen them coming over socially to the right wing traditionalist paradigm. And this has been quite encouraging. This has been quite interesting to see people who would never think of accelerationist policies or ideas, rather, or right wing policies, as in true right wing, not, as I said, somewhat Thatcherite policies. Um, I've seen them becoming almost medieval in their view of things. And I use medieval as a compliment rather than an insult, because essentially the way in which humanity has been far more traditional than it currently is. So I hope that the bouncing ball theory it makes sense to you, and I hope that you can either take it or improve on it. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.